Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It is good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. Data shows confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the U.S. are moving in the right direction, but rates of vaccination are declining. According to Johns Hopkins, daily infections fell below 40,000 Monday for the first time since September. Yet in the last week, 2 million vaccine doses were administered per day. That is down from a high of nearly 3.5 million in March. On Tuesday, President Biden met virtually with 6 Democratic and Republican governors to discuss changing distribution plans. Journalists were not allowed in the room. It comes after some governors criticized Mr. Biden's absence on weekly pandemic response conference calls. The administration is also monitoring a ransomware attack that crippled a major fuel supply line. The Colonial pipeline runs along the East Coast. The Biden administration says it's working on contingency plans to move fuel if it's not up and running by the weekend.
These states who are impacted, even with the turning on of the pipeline system, they still may feel a supply crunch as Colonial fully resumes. So, but the American people can feel assured that this administration is working with the company to get it resumed as soon as possible.
We'll have more on that in a moment, but first, the Senate Rules Committee is debating a bill that could significantly change the U.S. election system. Democrats want to bring S1, also known as the For the People Act, up for a vote. A version of the bill already passed the House in March. Senate Republicans claim it's federal overreach and say they want to add some 100 amendments to it. Here's Minority Leader Mitch McConnell earlier.
The Democratic Party, on its own, wants to rewrite the ground rules of American politics for their benefit. We all know that's what this is about. It's hard to imagine anything that would erode public confidence in our democracy more drastically. This bill has purely partisan support in the House. It had bipartisan opposition. It's one thing to make fiscal policy that way, to use reconciliation to tax and to spend. It's very different to try to hotwire our democracy itself without a single vote from the other side.
Democrats are under pressure to use their razor-thin majorities in Congress to pass legislative priorities while they still can. The president is asking for a police reform package on his desk by May 25th, but early indications show that's unlikely to happen. Plus, the White House is looking for significant progress on its massive jobs and infrastructure plan by Memorial Day. For more on all of this, let's bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns, Marianna Sotomayor, and Natasha Korecki. Caitlin is CBSN's Washington reporter. Marianna is a congressional reporter at the Washington Post. And Natasha is a Politico White House correspondent. Welcome to you all. Natasha, let me begin with you. The president has made several public bids for bipartisanship on his infrastructure proposals. Has anything come of these meetings with Republicans, and does he risk alienating his own party?
Well, there are already, to answer the second part of your question, there are already some, hiccups along the way with progressives a little worried here about these overtures to Republicans by Biden. But, the White House is urging patience. There's a lot of different tactics they can use right now and paths they can use. They're going to have another bite at the apple through reconciliation, the White House believes. With Republicans so far, the big meeting is going to happen tomorrow and Thursday, when you have, the leadership coming into the White House, and then you also have Senator Capito and some other senators coming into the White House. I would say that from sources, they've all been saying this Capito compromise is the real deal. She is really negotiating in good faith, and the White House believes that if they can really get her and others to move on board, they're going to be able to expand that to other Republicans, because after all, these are pet projects they're offering in all of these senators' different districts. They also see McConnell's recent comments on Sunday saying, well, maybe we can up this to $800 billion for infrastructure. They see that as a sign that he's willing to negotiate. So a lot of cynicism on the Hill and of course in the White House, just as far as can they actually make this happen? But, right now they're at the early stages and they're feeling pretty confident that they can get somewhere with this.
Meantime, Caitlin, on another topic, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell vowed to block Democrats' For the People Act. What does the act do, and why is it controversial for several Republicans and also some Democrats?
That's right, and McConnell's presence at the Rules Committee markup of this bill earlier today was really remarkable because it shows how big of an issue this is on the Republican side. And Majority Leader Chuck Schumer was also present and shows how big of a deal this is for Democrats as well. Republicans largely object to this from a policy perspective because they believe that it is a federal takeover of elections. They think that they disagree with some of the provisions that would provide public financing for elections and many other proposals that even some election officials have said that might put some burdens on local and state officials. But more broadly speaking, this, of course, is coming in reaction or after we've seen Republicans at the state level move to change voting laws in the wake of the 2020 election. And undergirding all of this is the former President Trump, continuing to make fraudulent, baseless claims about the election, and that's really fueling the base of the party to push forward with election reforms at the state level. And according to our own polling, CBS polling, about 70% of Republicans say that Biden did not legitimately win the election. So those are kind of the dynamics on the Republican side, but they also are opposed to this from a policy level. And Democrats, meanwhile, say that this is why this kind of legislation is needed, that the baseline needs to be established for voter protections. However, they've come under some criticism as well, including from some local officials across the country who say that some of these deadlines and targets and timelines are just really burdensome for local officials. So Democrats moved some amendments today, or tried to address some of those concerns. But there's also this bigger challenge facing Democrats, which is that they are not all united on this bill. I mean, today's markup really showed that they're not going to get any Republican support for this, but they also haven't shored up the Democrats on this as well. Joe Manchin, of course, remains the single outlier on this bill. He said he is not yet supportive of it and is concerned about a partisan election bill being put forth. And this is why you've seen a lot of activists try to push to reform Senate rules to be able to pass this kind of bill. But again, support for filibuster reform is also elusive on Capitol Hill, with Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona also opposing it. So while this bill may make it out of the markup, may make it out of committee, it still faces a very uphill climb here in the Senate and raises questions about how Democrats need to strategize next and perhaps have a more targeted approach to these voting issues.
Natasha, back on infrastructure for a moment. If the White House compromises with Republicans on infrastructure, do we have an idea of what is on the chopping block potentially?
Well, what White House has said is that they're, behind the scenes, they're saying they're really focusing this aspect of the negotiations on hard infrastructure. Now, of course, there's this whole other part of the bigger, more massive infrastructure plan that Biden wants, and that includes the so-called soft infrastructure, the child care, some of the elder care, education-related, benefits and so forth, that the White House is recognizing Republicans are not going to sign on to that. So they are looking at this as that is a separate negotiation. So far, they don't see a lot as on the chopping block because they're looking at this as two separate. They're separating the two. One, hard infrastructure to do with Republicans. The other part, they might have to do through, likely would have to do through reconciliation. And I think that's why you're seeing the White House bring in Joe Manchin and bring in Kyrsten Sinema right now. They're trying to get them signed on early on to this bipartisan infrastructure bill. If that falls apart with Republicans, then they can come back and say, look, we did everything we can. We need you now we need to work with progressives, and we need to get this across the goal line for the more larger, the families plan and the jobs plan is really the two different infrastructure, bills or packages that they're talking about. But really, the White House recognizes what they're working with Republicans, and they know it's a no-go if they try to go anywhere. They might do some negotiations on this infrastructure bill and say, hey, well, how about lead pipes? Can we talk about that? How about electrical grids? Can we talk about that? And try to expand it some. But they really know that this whole care economy that they've been talking about, some of these other benefits in the families plan, that's going to have to most likely be Democrats only.
Marianna, I want to ask you about the story that we've continued to cover here on Red and Blue for several days now. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy made public what he said on a hot mic days earlier. He wants Congresswoman Liz Cheney gone from her leadership post. Now, she won a resounding majority in a secret vote just 2 months ago. What do her prospects look like now, and what are you hearing from people there on Capitol Hill?
Well, Elaine, there's no saving Liz Cheney at this point. Of course, this vote is going to happen tomorrow. It is also going to be a closed vote, so we won't know exactly which Republicans voted in which way. But what we do know is that a majority of the caucus is no longer backing her. We've heard from some members who did end up voting to keep her in leadership actually now say they're not going to do that. One of them actually being one of the 10 Republicans who did vote to impeach Trump. It's Congressman John Katko from New York. He's going to be backing fellow New Yorker Elise Stefanik, who is likely to be replacing Cheney, potentially in a vote that could happen as early as tomorrow, but also as late as next week. But all signs point to her not going to be able to stay as the highest ranking Republican in the House caucus. And it's really coming at a time, it's really a data point, is how I like to describe it, as we discuss where the Republican Party is in this post-Trump era. It is very pro-Trump. And Cheney, for her part, has really just been discussing and wanting to amplify the fact that, yes, I acknowledge what a lot of the Republicans in the caucus are saying, which is that Trump was able to bring in new voters, working class, blue collars, with his populist appeal. But it's also worth acknowledging and trying to understand that Trump also sidelined a number of voters, including suburban women, independents, educated voters, and they don't necessarily have a home right now. So her argument really is, if we want to win nationally again, and potentially future Republican president, we need to talk about this. Republicans, of course, are framing this as, well, she's focusing on the past. We don't want to relitigate the election conversation or what led to the insurrection. We need to look forward. So that's really the signal that they're going to send when they are going to vote her out tomorrow.
Yeah, Marianna, though, help us understand here. You mentioned Representative Katko, for instance. So he is not somebody who subscribes to former President Trump's baseless notions of widespread election fraud, and yet he is not standing by, if I heard you correctly, Liz Cheney at this point. Help us understand the dynamic. What is it that Republicans like him are saying to explain why they're not continuing to support Congresswoman Cheney at this point?
Yeah, it's been very interesting talking to a number of those Republicans who did vote to impeach Trump to just get a sense of where they are. And one of the biggest takeaways is the fact that, yeah, they do feel in some ways demoralized that the person who is in this leadership position, who has been vocal and just bringing up these notions about Trump, will be ousted for just being able to speak out. But, however, they do say that they agree with a lot of the majority of the Republicans who call this a distraction, because they, for their part, could be doing the same thing, right? They did vote to impeach Trump. They could be condemning him, but they see it more as a strategic time and place to do that. They see what Cheney has done, and constantly, even any time that Trump puts out a statement nowadays, she has to rebuke that. They do see that as a distraction in terms of the overall messaging and how to get to winning back the majority in 2022. But they also are at a crossroads. They're very much analyzing what their own role is, how outspoken they can be. But it's interesting about these 10 Republicans who did vote to impeach. They don't regret that vote. And in town halls, and even if you ask them, it's going to be actually great to see them back in town so we can ask them these questions. How vocal are they going to be? Are they going to continue to take Cheney's lead? Because she has very much said she's not going to stay quiet, even if she is a rank and file member of the caucus.
So, Caitlin, with that as our backdrop, what impact is all of this having on the Republican Party more broadly then?
That's right. Well, this is an issue happening on the House side. We're over here on the Senate side, and senators are being asked about this as well. Earlier today, John Thune, a member of the Republican leadership here on the Senate, right behind us, was asked about, how can you have a unified party with all of this going on in the House, and also at the same time that former President Trump continues to put out statements about the election. I mean, every week he's putting out statements trying to relitigate the election. Thune's argument was that relitigating 2020 is not a winning issue for Republicans if they want to gain seats in the House and Senate to be able to govern after the 22 midterms. But you have the former president, who is the highest profile member of the party, continuing to push forward these claims, and you're seeing those claims resonate with the base of the party. So this is what these lawmakers are having to kind of juggle. On one hand, they want to say that, look, we're going to be focused on pushing back against the Biden administration. We're going to be focused on pushing forward our views for governing. But they have Trump pushing forward these messages. They have Republicans at the state level pushing forward legislation that is aligned with these messages from the former president. Of course, in Arizona right now, you have an audit underway that was not sanctioned by election officials to, again, relitigate the 2020 election. So as much as this is a party that says that they want to move forward, there is this still embrace of Trump and his supporters that will continue. And that's a question after this vote tomorrow about Liz Cheney, is what kind of role does she have, and what kind of role can she have moving forward, and kind of how does the party actually move forward after this? Can they, if the former president continues to weigh in every day?
So many open questions. Caitlin Huey-Burns, Marianna Sotomayor, and Natasha Korecki, thank you all very much. Really appreciate it.